So we're running a little bit low on time, so I'd like to just see if I can fit two quick questions in, and then I think we'll finish up. The first one, and I think this is a really interesting one. It's been touched on very briefly by a few of the panelists, but we haven't really had a chance to kind of get into it too much. Scott, one of our viewers, is asking, what's the best role for Taiwan in helping us meet the security challenges of the Indo-Pacific? And what sort of role could Canada potentially play in that as well? So, what do you think about Taiwan and the different Indo-Pacific approaches? Obviously, it's an extremely sensitive issue for China, but as we've seen in the U.S. Taiwan relationship, that's been improving quite a bit significantly over the last 4 years. And I think other countries have been improving their relations with Taiwan too, maybe less publicly. But what's the viewpoint? Maybe I'll start with Greg on this. How do we look at Taiwan in the coming months, and how it fits into this sort of Indo-Pacific rubric?
Thanks, Jonathan. This is another one of those issues where I think Washington has shifted and continues to shift. So it is now, again, this largely is a result of Hong Kong, the sense that Hong Kong was the final nail in the idea of peaceful reunification. And not just for Washington, but for Taipei too, right? And any hope within Taiwan that that was a viable future is now gone. And so if the long-term prognosis is that there is no hope for peaceful reunification, then there needs to be a shift in our policy toward doing all that is necessary to support Taiwan's autonomy. And a lot of initiatives that would have been inconceivable just a couple of years ago now in Washington are absolutely mainstream. I mean, we talked about arms sales. There's a very active debate now about whether or not there should be a free trade agreement or something approaching a free trade agreement between the U.S. and Taiwan. Those discussions aren't limited to the U.S. I think you're hearing similar discussions in Australia, in Japan, in Europe. Everybody recognizes that the space for Taiwan is shrinking, and while we can't, it's too dangerous and provocative to really try to widen that aperture too much vis-a-vis Beijing. We do have to prevent further shrinking of Taiwan's international space. I don't know what else to say. There are no good answers here, but this is going to be one of those issues where the international community just has to draw a line in the sand and say here, no further.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Commodore Leary, could I have your thoughts on this, on Taiwan and its role in these frameworks?
Certainly. A Canadian role is to support the entry of Taiwan into the CPP, and perhaps even assisted by the U.S. eventually signing on to it. We can also, Taiwan has done great work for itself, and it's done great work for the rest of us in setting a superb example with its COVID response. And there are other areas where it's an expert. It's an expert in cyber defense. It's been expert in intelligence work, especially with regard to China. And I'm told, and I believe it, that Canada is not taking any advantage of the offers Taiwan has made in those areas to contribute to our own security. And then when you look at Canada and seeking greater involvement, greater understanding in the region, where's our Chinese speakers? Well, I dare say you don't want to send them to Beijing to be taught. We should be taking up or creating an opportunity with Taiwan for language speaking for diplomats and security officials. Thanks again.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I think Taiwan traditionally has been a really important relationship for Canada, but I think that you've underscored that we really need to find a way to strategize this relationship in a much more precise way and sort of an unapologetic way too. I think there's many areas that we can work with Taiwan on, Trans-Pacific Partnership being one. But it's a lot of important insights that you put there. Ken, can you give us a little insights on how Japan views Taiwan and how Japan may view Taiwan's sort of inclusion in some of this architecture? Obviously a very sensitive point for Japan and its relationships with China as well, but But my understanding is that the relationship between Japan and Taiwan has been incrementally warming. It was always a relatively warm relationship in recent years, but it's been warming year by year. How do you see this?
Well, obviously, Taiwan is a geostrategically very important actor for Japan, and our cultural ties has been quite strong. And I think that those relationship will be recognized continuously for incoming months and years. But something that we have with an increasing concern, as Greg mentioned, that their political security space is very much being squeezed by the rise of Chinese power and the changing concept of the air and naval superiority in the Taiwan Straits. And there is a very hard to maintain the status quo by putting the proportional kind of capability that the Taiwan can deal with the Chinese ever heightening kind of offensive posture vis-a-vis Taiwan. So whether we could have kind of encouraging kind of efforts to have more like a resilient posture of Taiwan vis-a-vis Chinese offense will be, I think, highly important nature. And that's what I think the Trump administration tried to do, especially in the recent months. But whether Japan could be part of those kind of, coordination to tacitly encouraging their capacity is still, it's a very kind of touchy subject, as you mentioned. Because it is also be under the structure of the wider Japan, Beijing, Tokyo-Beijing relationship, which has also been improving in recent 2 years. So that economic interest is still there, and that has been very much overwhelmed by the potential kind of growth of the Chinese market, and the Japanese business sectors and automobile company manufacturers are still very much attracted by the potential rise of China. Whether we could invest strategically on Taiwan at the expense of losing such kind of opportunity in China is still doubtful. So that there is a very much nuanced way of engaging Taiwan from Tokyo's perspective.
Thanks, Jimbo-san. That's really helpful, and I think as you said, Taiwan is quite a tightrope. I think sometimes for Japan to walk, but an important tightrope nonetheless. It seems whenever Sino-Japanese relations are improving, this seems to be one of the sort of vulnerability points that the Chinese always like to push on, and I think are very much wanting to weaken that element of Japan-Taiwan ties at any opportunity they get. Eva, you have the final word on this. So what's your, from a European perspective, on how Taiwan should be involved in some of these frameworks?
Well, I would definitely not speak about the official EU or European perspective in this sense, if I'm allowed. But clearly, the Taiwan issue is really this thing that hangs there that we just tend to avoid. Is too sensitive. We don't even coordinate properly internationally on the issue. We don't actually address it in a very serious way. And as Greg said, it is really the last red line that we need to be thinking of. And it clearly is the strategically indispensable partner in the region if we manage to engage properly internationally with Taiwan. But I'm a little bit optimistic actually when everyone says it's just this untouchable problem and we can't even discuss it. I happen to come from a very, very small Central European country that happened to make headlines just a couple of months ago. With our Senate Speaker's visit to Taipei and his famous quote, "I am Taiwanese," which eventually kind of, took the whole world by surprise. And what was even more kind of warming, I found, was the reaction from the international community and the support that eventually he received, including from European leaders, which was afterwards actually triggered by the harsh reaction by Beijing and criticism of Beijing, and eventually we criticized the reaction itself. You know, we were actually told to behave, and the European leaders issued a joint response saying that diplomats, that this is not a diplomatic language that should be used between equal partners. And eventually the whole affair escalated to an open letter suggesting Europe may be rethinking its one China policy. I mean, this is a little bit far-fetched, but I'm just trying to say that even a small country and a small gesture like this can eventually trigger a reaction that may have an impact, and that we should not necessarily be constantly just hiding behind the sensitivity of the topic.
Thanks so much, Eva. And I think that's a great way for us to end. You know, I think today we've had a good range of comments and discussions and questions from the audience on a range of different issues. I think we talked quite a bit of the maritime security issues ranging from East China Sea, South China Sea to the Taiwan Straits. And I think we also got into, which is important, is the broader strategic framework that we're talking about here. So we could have spent the entire 90 minutes focused on freedom of navigation operations and intricate maritime security issues, but we did look at the broader strategic framing which is happening. And I think the timing is really important with the new U.S. administration coming in. So again, you know, I thank everyone for joining us from all the different capitals that you've joined. Again, Ken, I think it's time for you to get some sleep. Very late there in Japan. But thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to having a chance to gathering everyone again in person, hopefully sometime this year. I'm optimistic that 2021 will be a better year. I guess it's next year, 2021. But thank you so much to everyone, and thank you to our audience for tuning in.
Thank you, everybody.